What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. We're going back at it with another React content. The death of college football in the Northeast. This came up on my recommended, and I figured we'll give it a watch. So, without further ado, let's do it. The original video is in the link in the description, so please check out their original content. Give them some love, give them some likes, and comment.
Look at this map of the United States. These are all the college football programs competing at the highest level of the NCAA, the Football Bowl subdivision.
Football, FBS.
There's something off about it though. As we all know, college football is a cornerstone of American sports culture. Entire towns rally behind their teams, Saturday games draw tens, sometimes hundreds of thousands of people, and the traditions are practically sacred.
I'm from, some of you guys don't know, but I'm originally from Iowa City, where the University of Iowa is, and it was the talk of the town. Iowa Hawkeye football is lifeblood within that community, but I no longer live there, and I live in a city where football isn't quite as, beloved. They love them when they're winning, but when they're losing, they don't show out. Like Iowa Hawkeyes, when they're bad, that stadium is still pretty full for what it is, even in the cold. Like, they're diehard fans, they still tailgate and everything. But where I am now, it's just like, unless the FBS team is winning, that stadium is probably half or mostly filled with the opposing team.
But this level of commitment isn't consistent in every corner of the country.
Yeah, that's true.
This is the Northeast, a region with one of the largest populations in the United States.
60 million
It's
people.
also where gridiron football first took root, led by none other than collegiate institutions.
Oh, hold on. Let me go back a little bit.
Took root, led by none other.
Look at this. So, the Harvard-Yale game is very popular amongst people, but like, it's not FBS, it's FCS. Rutgers is not very good in football anymore. And I can't for the life of me. I think that's Penn. Penn is definitely not a team that is there's definitely not a team that is worth remembering when it comes to FBS, I guess, like at this level. Like back in the day, these teams were really good. And he's probably going to go into that a little bit.
Other than collegiate institutions. Yet, as we can see on this map, there's a scarcity of top-level football when you consider how many people are living here, along with the sport's rich history in this region.
Yeah, that's so interesting. So, okay, so this whole northeastern region of, I think he did New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, and Maine. In New York, there's only, three FBS schools, one in Connecticut, it's UConn, two Massachusetts teams, and then there's nothing in this corner here. And then even if you go down to freaking New Jersey, there's only one in New Jersey. You go down to Pennsylvania, there's only three. And it's not until you get to Ohio, even West Virginia has two teams. And then you go down to Maryland and for like this huge block right here. This huge block of teams. It stretches from like, I would even argue like El Paso. It's like this big, we can even stop right here. You can see this strike contrast of where everyone is, this line. And if you guys ever watch Real-Time Lore, he talks about this line. This line is very important for the American society, and you can just see this huge cluster right here.
Region. Stadiums here don't sell out like others, most rivalries aren't commanding national attention, and the sport is far from a cultural phenomenon, at least at a collegiate level. The question is, why? It's certainly not for a lack of people or history. Sure, there are some notable programs and marquee games, but for some reason, college football is seemingly put on the back burner here, and that likely won't change anytime soon.
I found this site called box.gg that'll let you unbox packs on their site and they'll ship the physical cards straight.
To understand college football's relative absence in the Northeast, we need to look back at its origins and the role it played in this very region. Way back to well over a century ago, football was a Northeast-dominated sport. It took on many variations and eventually evolved into the game we know today. But thanks to the colonial colleges who regularly organized games between themselves, private universities like Harvard.
Interesting. Yeah, you have like the collegiate, the Ivy League schools in Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Jersey.
Yale and Princeton popularized the game in America. In fact, if you look up the national champions from over 100 years ago, you'd consistently find
Oh, it was Princeton, not Penn. It was Princeton. That's what it is. That's crazy to think. Yeah, Yale, Harvard, Princeton were the schools that really pioneered, and then like there's Penn, pioneered this this football wave from like 1874 plus.
An Ivy League school. These institutions were and still are culturally elite colleges. So football here wasn't just a rough and tumble game.
That was a Weird looking stadium. I don't think I ever saw.
So football.
Look at this stadium, guys. This big circle, like, and it has like grass on the edge. That's cool. That's a cool design for a stadium. Definitely cool, but definitely can't. This thing won't be holding 100,000 people anytime soon.
Here wasn't just a rough and tumble game. It was a reflection of prestige played by those who came from the country's most influential families. But despite being instrumental in the sport's development, these schools represented a relatively small portion of the population, all while having a strong barrier of entry. Their exclusivity, both in admissions and athletics, made it difficult for the broader public to connect to their football programs. This stands in stark contrast to what we know college football to be today.
There goes Davis!
There goes Davis!
Auburn's gonna win
the football game!
During this time, however, education in America was
great. I love
changing
that
behind
video.
the scenes, and this is all thanks to the Morrill Land Grant Act. For context, 1862 saw the Morrill Act introduced, which granted federal land to states for the purpose of establishing public universities. These institutions were tasked with providing accessible and practical education to the masses, particularly in agriculture, engineering, and military science. So over time, when new states joined the Union, whether during the post-Civil War era or through westward expansion, land-grant universities immediately became central to their identity, since these institutions were often established shortly after statehood. This meant that those living in newly formed states had an outlet for their state pride.
That's a mute.
By the late 19th century, many of these land-grant schools had developed football programs that further amplified this state pride. Suddenly, you mix in some marching bands, traditions, and weekly on-field battles between schools from other states. These institutions would go on to symbolize the shared identity of its.
Dude, this footage is crazy. It's kind of hurting my eyes a little bit. But that's actually very interesting. The land grant schools were I guess like the Ivy League schools were the pioneers. They walked so that the land grant schools could run, essentially. That's what I'm getting from this video.
Residents, with football being the primary outlet. These schools were accessible, but not as accessible as buying tickets through SeatGeek, the sponsor of today. From football to hockey, basketball to SeatGeek. SeatGeek yourself, whether you want.
Sorry,
Now, back to the video.
I don't like watching ads.
So
I'm
with
sorry.
many states utilizing football in schools as a way to take advantage of its population's patriotism, it's worth noting that the Northeast, with its already established elite schools, didn't reap the rewards from the Morrill Act in the same way.
Very interesting. They just did. I guess they just didn't take advantage of the public university kind of style.
While land-grant universities wriggled their way into the region, they were often overshadowed by a dense network of private institutions, which made it difficult to rapidly spread school pride to residents in the area. Meanwhile, in regions like the Midwest and the South, public universities were relatively free to carve out their identities without any competition.
Yeah.
Plus, the fragmented nature of higher education in the Northeast also played a significant role. Many public universities in the region developed as part of sprawling state systems, with multiple campuses serving different areas.
But like, is that even bad? Like, because for example, okay, so University of Wisconsin has UW. It's a UW system where you have Wisconsin, the football team we know and love, the Badgers. But then they have smaller subdivisions like I think it's like Liverpool. No, it's not Liverpool. I don't remember. I used to live in Wisconsin. There was quite a few towns that also were in that UW system, and they had football teams. Some of them did, but I would say that they're not as big. They're not FBS. But like the University of Tennessee also has the University of Tennessee kind of umbrella, because there's the Chukanaga or whatever, because that's the University of Tennessee, Chukanaga, don't quote me, as well as the University of Tennessee, we all know the 100,000 people stadium kind of vibe. So like, yes, I could see where he's getting at, where like the UMass Boston or UMass Plymouth or whatever has multiple campuses, but does that mean those other smaller campuses can't have their own team? Because a lot of times they're just under the same like umbrella, but like they're still separate schools.
For instance, the State University of New York is made up of over 60 institutions. This makes it challenging for any one campus to dominate any particular region's sports culture. Lacking a single home base contrasts sharply with other state schools that primarily had one campus to take in their vast network of students and alumni.
It makes
sense. To make
sense.
matters even worse for college football in this area, the elite universities that once dominated the sport eventually shifted their focus away from athletics. Prioritizing academics above all else, These high-end institutions chose not to compete with the rising power of large state universities that built their identities around athletic excellence. But wait, just because college football grew beyond the region in which it was developed, that doesn't mean that football as a whole is disregarded here. After all, there are well over 50 million people living in this corner of the country, plenty of whom are avid football fans. In fact, this population density is a significant reason why collegiate football is pushed to the wayside here. Unlike the sprawling towns and relatively less populated areas like the Rust Belt, the South, the Midwest, and beyond, the Northeast is often defined by the cluster of its major cities. For example, Boston's storied legacy with the Red Sox, Celtics, Bruins, and later the Patriots has long made pro teams the heartbeat of its sports culture. And in New York, the sheer number of franchises across every major league offers fans an abundance of options. This pattern extends across the region. Throughout this corridor, nearly every major city boasts representation in all 4 major sports leagues.
Interesting. I didn't even think about it. I know that it exists, but I always felt like I am a college football fan, but I also have NFL teams that I also like, and I do tend to enjoy and watch. So I never really thought about that other people didn't also live that way. I guess like that makes sense. Like the NFL makes more money than college football, and that would make it so that more people do tune in to those games. But I don't know. I think that it could just be an excuse to not have college. I like the first argument better, where it's like there's so much competition amongst them itself, like the New York system, that it just doesn't breed. It just doesn't breed a culturally accepted like one team, kind of like to rally behind. Like when Iowa Hawkeyes is like, it's Iowa Hawkeyes or Iowa State, and then you have UNI, of course, and then Drake, and then but like those are the 2 primary teams that are like of the state. And then you have like Nebraska, where you have Nebraska. Like these, like you centralize your focus on it. And none of these and most of these places don't have NFL teams or even any pro teams. Iowa doesn't have any pro teams. Nebraska doesn't have any pro teams, as well as like Alabama Georgia does. They have a pro team, but like Georgia's still very popular. Does that make sense?
Many of these cities were among the first to host pro teams during the formative years of these leagues, which gave fans a reliable, high-level product that grew alongside the leagues themselves.
High-level.
As professional sports gained national prominence, the loyalty these franchises received cemented them as the primary focus of the region's sports culture. Meanwhile, for colleges, this left little room for any competition. Sure, Rutgers and Syracuse have notable programs. The annual Army-Navy game is one to mark of the calendar, and depending on if you lump them into the region, Penn State has quite a strong reputation. But for the most part, professional teams took over in this.
Okay, in his video, I would not necessarily disagree, but I would definitely expand on the cultural phenomenon of Penn State and Syracuse. Because yes, Penn State and Syracuse do fall within his like umbrella of the Northeast. But Syracuse is so far away from like New York City and that area, like Boston. And Penn State, same thing. They're not in Philadelphia. They're not in Pittsburgh. They're like their own little thing. So like the town and like the culture around the surrounding towns were able to come together and like become that small town vibe for themselves. Yeah, Syracuse is a big city, but like it still is like its own thing. Rutgers is an FBS school. Yes, I would say that, but I would not put them in the same like category as like Syracuse and Penn State. I think Rutgers is more of a what is that? What do you say? Diamond in the rough when it comes to like cultural phenomenons.
Region.
Boom, boom. Sad music.
This has the opposite effect in parts of the country that are dominated by college sports. Some of the biggest football programs in the country have been able to develop into such a powerhouse because the metro areas weren't big enough to attract a major professional franchise of their own.
Exactly, that's what I was saying. Like Penn State and Syracuse, they are very different. Like Texas, the Longhorns sits in Austin. There's no pro team there. There are 2 pro teams around them. Alabama doesn't have any pro teams. Georgia, I can't think of where Georgia sits, but you get what I'm saying.
Or alternatively, these college programs established themselves long before there was any potential for a pro franchise to arrive. So sports leagues wouldn't even attempt to get involved in cities that were already obsessed with their local school's athletics program.
Yeah.
Hold on, take a look at this. Think you can tell what's real anymore?
Yes, it's so
What
fake.
you're looking at right now isn't a traditional
But hold on. It's not like college sports are a forgotten entity altogether in these states. After all, the Frozen Four routinely features teams from Massachusetts, while Villanova, Syracuse, and UConn are March Madness staples. Knowing that though, this wide range of sporting success plays a major part in what's going against college football.
Diversity.
Simply put, there's far too many sports to choose from.
Too much
In a
sports.
region littered with cities that experience all four seasons, shaped by locals, transplants, and immigrants from various cultures, loyalties often skew toward media-dominant professional teams or hometown favorites. This dilutes the cultural pull of any one single team, let alone college football. People certainly care about that level of gridiron, but it doesn't take over on Saturdays in the same way that you would find in other places that know how to pull off a good tailgate.
Yeah, that just like bro, I should have made this video. Just literally just what I said earlier is that the culture within these areas are very vastly different. Like I'm from Iowa. Saturday comes, sometimes Friday. Saturday comes, you're up at 8 a.m. You're pulling out the beer. You're drinking till the game, after the game, till you fall asleep. You're going to these tailgates at the stadium, around the stadium, in the neighborhood around the stadium. You're going downtown. Well, the downtown Iowa City, and you're drinking there. At all the bars will have the game playing, and they'll all have them audio. For example, I live in the Phoenix area, and there's ASU, which is the primary dominated team there. But there's no tailgating, and if you are gonna find a tailgate, it's not gonna be a very traditional tailgate. I find more traditional tailgates at the Cubs facility for spring games than I do at any ASU event. And that stadium is like half full, maybe, and the students usually leave around halftime. So like the culture isn't much there, as well as even, and then just like what he said, like immigrants, transplants, and just a variety of things. Phoenix is one of those. Tons of immigrants live here, tons of transplants, like myself, who have teams back home that we're diehard fans of, and we're not going to switch, as well as just the lack of wanting that culture, and they just too much diversity. We have an MLB team, there was an NHL team, there was an NFL team, and then you have tons of other smaller spring programs that are in the area as well for those transplants and the snowbirds.
I could be wrong about that though. So if you're from the Northeast, leave a comment below indicating which team you support, whether they're professional or at a college level. Anyways, the city lifestyle that millions here...
I would say he's not wrong, and you can definitely find examples of where he could be wrong, but I would say on average in the Northeast, and even some of the Southwest, like New Mexico, Arizona, and I would even argue California, where there just isn't that culture, that diehard culture for college sports. And then my fiance always says, she's like, where I'm from in Iowa City, she's like, Iowa City is the type of town that goes to high school games. And I'm like, because there's nothing to do. And I'm like, hey, don't need to be disrespecting the culture.
are exposed to certainly doesn't help either. Saturdays are often seen as a time for social gatherings or enjoying the vibrant city lifestyle. All of this is prioritized instead of dedicating the entire day to football. In Texas, you'll see towns come together even for high school football on Friday evenings. But in these states...
I just said that. That's hilarious. Yeah, there are definitely people that do go to high school games in the Midwest. There's a lot of towns that do go to their local high school rivalries because most of the people who live in these towns went to these schools. They still have they don't leave. They just kind of stay there. And then they all day Saturday. You wake up at 8, 9 o'clock. You pull out the beer. You start drinking, and you don't stop until you go to bed.
Up here, it's only NFL Sundays that have the ability to lure people to the couch or the stadium with great effect. But could any of this change? Will there ever be a day that we see a shift in the Northeast sporting culture? If we're being honest, the odds are slim. One of the biggest hurdles lies in the high school pipeline. For football to thrive in college, it needs a steady stream of local talent to build competitive programs, and that's something the Northeast struggles with. While states like Texas, Florida, and Georgia churn out top prospects year after year, high school football in the Northeast hasn't kept pace. There aren't nearly as many top recruits coming from the area, and the best players from the region often leave for powerhouse programs in the Midwest or the South, where they're more likely to gain national exposure and develop under systems built to funnel players into the NFL.
Yeah.
This talent drain creates a vicious cycle. Without a strong local talent pool, Northeast college programs struggle to compete on the national stage.
100%.
And without successful programs to rally around, young athletes in the region are less likely to see football as a viable path.
That's why many people argue that the South SEC is always the better conference, because they have the most talent pool available, and these prospects generally just go to those schools because they are the best schools. Because it's just, the cycle is in reverse with skill level, and like it makes sense. Like you have the best talent pool, you get the best program, you get the best schools, and then you also get the best talent from other programs like the Northeast or some of the lower level Midwestern schools or even the Southwest.
In contrast, other sports like basketball and soccer continue to grow in popularity. This will only divide attention and resources even further. Lastly, the growing awareness around player safety is also important to note, as concerns about concussions and long-term health risks have led to declining participation in youth football across the country. This trend is especially pronounced in urban and suburban areas that you see dominating the region.
Yeah.
Parents are becoming skeptical of the sport's violent nature and are more likely to steer their children towards safer athletic alternatives. Given these challenges, it's hard to imagine a seismic shift in the region's relationship with college football. The history, the culture, the professional sports dominance, the lack of local talent, and now the health concerns, these factors create a perfect storm that limits college football's potential for growth. Now, obviously, there will always be a demand for college football. People will still root for their alma mater, and even more will continue to love everything the Power 4 conferences have to offer. But in this neck of the woods, there's far too much going on for all eyes to be fixated on one specific level of football. And if you want to keep up with everything going on in the big picture of sports, then I highly recommend.
That's 100% true. Like I think that there is a level of like I think he's right, where there's too much going on in that region to make it so college sports is priority. Because I think there's more diehard professional sports fans in the Northeast than they are diehard professional sports fans in, say, like the Midwest or the Southeast or even the South. Yeah, they have a lot of fans, but like think about that. Like you go to a Michigan game, there's 100,000 person stadium. You go to the Detroit game, it's not 100,000 people going to that game. And you go to Tennessee, maybe you go to Texas. Texas has a big stadium. I don't remember exactly. I think it's like 80 plus to that 100,000 or whatever. And then you go to a Dallas game. It's not seating 100,000 people. You go to a Houston game. It's not seating 100,000 people because those fans are die hard and they will go on Saturday and they will watch and party all day. But that's going to be it. Please like and subscribe. Peace.